Okay, Hare Krishna, good morning. So today we'll be wrapping up Canto 2, Chapter 3. So we'll be finishing Chapter 3 from Canto 2 today. I will share my screen, start to read. So, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya, Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we'll read Canto 2, Chapter 3, text 24 and 25, the last texts of the chapter. And this text 24 is a very famous verse. And Prabhupada has a nice purport, and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur also has a nice purport. So we'll be doing a lot of reading of commentaries today mostly. And then if anyone has any comments they can share, that would be nice. So text 24. Tad ashmasharam hridayam badedam yad grihyamanair harinamadeyai navikriyeta tayada vikaro netre jalam gatra ruheshu harshaha. Word for word. Tat, that. Ashmasharam is steel framed. Hridayam, heart. Bata idam, certainly that. Yet, which grihyamanai, in spite of chanting, harinam, the holy name of the Lord, deyai, by concentration of the mind, na, does not, vikriyeta, change, ata, thus, yada, when, vikaraha, reaction, netre, in the eyes, jalam, tears, gatra ruheshu, at the pores, harsha, eruptions of ecstasy. Translation. Certainly that heart is steel framed, which, in spite of one's chanting the holy name of the Lord with concentration, does not change when ecstasy takes place, tears fill the eyes, and the hairs stand on end. Purport by Srila Prabhupada. We should note with profit that in the first 3 chapters of the second canto, a gradual process of development of devotional service is being presented. In the first chapter, the first step in devotional service for God consciousness by the process of hearing and chanting has been stressed, and a gross conception of the personality of Godhead in his universal form for the beginners is recommended. By such a gross conception of God through the material manifestations of his energy, one is enabled to spiritualize the mind and the senses and gradually concentrate the mind upon Lord Vishnu, the Supreme, who is present as the Supersoul in every heart and everywhere, in every atom of the material universe. The system of Pancha Upasana, recommending 5 mental attitudes for the common man, is also enacted for this purpose, namely gradual development, worship of the superior that may be in the form of fire, electricity, the sun, the mass of living beings, Lord Shiva, and at last, the impersonal supersoul, the partial representation of Lord Vishnu. They are all nicely described in the second chapter, but in the third chapter, further development is prescribed after one has actually reached the stage of Vishnu worship or pure devotional service. And the mature stage of Vishnu worship is suggested herein in relation to the change of heart. The whole process of spiritual culture is aimed at changing the heart of the living being in the matter of his eternal relation with the Supreme Lord as subordinate servant, which is his eternal constitutional position. So with the progress of devotional service, the reaction of change in the heart is exhibited by gradual detachment from the sense of material enjoyment, by a false sense of lording it over the world, and an increase in the attitude of rendering loving service to the Lord. Vidhi Bhakti, or regulated devotional service by the limbs of the body, namely the eyes, the ears, the nose, the hands, and the legs, as already explained herein before, is now stressed herein in relation to the mind, which is the impetus for all activities of the limbs of the body. It is expected by all means that by discharging regulated devotional service, one must manifest the change of heart. If there is no such change, the heart must be considered steel-framed, for it is not melted even when there is chanting of the holy name of the Lord. We must always remember that hearing and chanting are the basic principles of discharging devotional duties, and if they are properly performed, there will follow the reactional ecstasy with signs of tears in the eyes and standing of the hairs on the body. These are natural consequences and are the preliminary symptoms of the bhav stage, which occurs before one reaches the perfectional stage of prema, love of Godhead. If the reaction does not take place, even after continuous hearing and chanting of the holy name of the Lord, it may be considered to be due to offenses only. That is the opinion of the Sandarbha. In the beginning of chanting of the holy name of the Lord, if the devotee has not been very careful about evading the 10 kinds of offenses at the feet of the holy name, certainly the reaction of feeling of separation will not be visible by tears in the eyes and standing of the hair on end. The bhav stage is manifested by 8 transcendental symptoms, namely inertness, perspiration, standing of hairs on end, failing in the voice, trembling, paleness of the body, tears in the eyes, and finally trance. The Nectar of Devotion, a summary study of Srila Rupa Goswami's Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, explains those symptoms and vividly describes other transcendental developments, both in steady and accelerating manifestations. Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has very critically discussed all these bhav displays in connection with some unscrupulous neophytes imitating the above symptoms for cheap appreciation. Not only Vishwanath Chakravarti, but also Srila Rupa Goswami treated them very critically. Sometimes all the above 8 symptoms of ecstasy are imitated by the mundane devotees, prakrita sahajiyas, but the pseudo symptoms are at once detected when one sees the pseudo devotee addicted to so many forbidden things. Even though decorated with the signs of a devotee, a person addicted to smoking, drinking, or illegitimate sex with women cannot have all the above mentioned ecstatic symptoms. But it is seen that sometimes these symptoms are willfully imitated, and for this reason, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti accuses the imitators of being stone-hearted men. They are sometimes even affected by the reflection of such transcendental symptoms. Yet, if they still do not give up the forbidden habit, then they are hopeless cases for transcendental realization. When Lord Chaitanya met Srila Ramananda Rai of Kavar on the bank of the Godavari, the Lord developed all these symptoms, but because of the presence of some non-devotee brahmanas who were attendants of the Rai, the Lord suppressed these symptoms. So sometimes they are not visible even in the body of the first-class devotee for certain circumstantial reasons. Therefore, real steady bhav is definitely displayed in the matter of cessation of material desires, shanti, utilization of every moment in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, of Yartha Kalatvam, eagerness for glorifying the Lord constantly, nama gana gane sadaruchi, attraction for living in the land of the Lord, pritis tad vasati stale, complete detachment from material happiness, virakti, and pridelessness, mana shunyata. One who has developed all these transcendental qualities is really possessed of the bhav stage, as distinguished from the stone-hearted imitator or mundane devotee. The whole process can be summarized as follows. The advanced devotee who chants the holy name of the Lord in a perfectly offenseless manner and is friendly to everyone can actually relish the transcendental taste of glorifying the Lord. And the result of such realization is reflected in the cessation of all material desires, etc., as mentioned above. The neophytes, due to their being in the lower stage of devotional service, are invariably envious, so much so that they invent their own ways and means of devotional regulations without following the acharyas. As such, even if they make a show of constantly chanting the holy name of the Lord, they cannot relish the transcendental taste of the holy name. Therefore, the show of tears in the eyes, trembling, perspiration, unconsciousness, etc., is condemned. They can, however, get in touch with a pure devotee of the Lord and rectify their bad habits. Otherwise, they shall continue to be stone-hearted and unfit for any treatment. A complete progressive march on the return path home, back to Godhead, will depend on the instructions of the revealed scriptures directed by a realized devotee. And I'll quickly read text 25, and then we'll discuss mostly 24, since 25 is just an ending statement. So text 25, translation. O Sutta Goswami, your words are pleasing to our minds. Please therefore explain this to us as it was spoken by the great devotee Shukadev Goswami, who is very expert in transcendental knowledge and who spoke to Maharaj Parikshit upon being asked. Purport. Knowledge explained by the previous Acharya like Shukadev Goswami and followed by the next like Sutta Goswami is always powerful transcendental knowledge, and it is therefore penetrating and useful to all submissive students. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purports of the second canto, third chapter of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Pure Devotional Service, the Change in Heart. Om Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. So this verse, text 24, is a very famous verse. I'm sure everyone has heard it quoted multiple times in different contexts. This verse speaks about the steel-framed heart. And just to back up and give us the context here, so Shaunaka Rishi is the one that's speaking this verse, and he has asked Sutta Goswami to further speak on the discussion between Shukadev and Parikshit Maharaj. And Shaunaka Rishi has explained in the last few verses how one's existence is basically useless if not absorbed in thoughts and service of Krishna and his devotees. And now he's kind of culminating at this point, saying that, you know, one who is who remains completely unaffected by the chanting of the holy name, especially after having been doing so for a concentrated time, their heart is steel framed. That's the only explanation for why they're not experiencing the ecstasy that he explains here, tears filling the eyes and hair standing on end. So there's so many points that Prabhupada makes in this purport, and I'm sure that I will not capture all of them, but I've kind of just taken note of a few points that I hope that we can at least highlight. And if anybody would like to bring forth any other points that they took from this, that would be really nice as well. So one point here towards the beginning of the purport that Prabhupada mentions, he says, starting from this paragraph, the whole process of spiritual culture is aimed at changing the heart of the living being in the matter of his eternal relation with the Supreme Lord as subordinate servant, which is his eternal constitutional position. So, with the progress of devotional service, the reaction of change in the heart is exhibited by gradual detachment from the sense of material enjoyment, by a false sense of lording it over the world, and an increase in the attitude of rendering loving service to the Lord. So here Prabhupada is kind of explaining like a very experiential type of evidence that one can measure within themselves to determine if their heart is being changed. And what he's explaining is that as the heart changes, one becomes gradually more detached from material enjoyment, and simultaneously they have an increased attachment to service of Krishna. And one thing that's interesting, for example, if you were to think of other yoga processes, you know, and especially something like a Mayavad philosophy or impersonal type of practice, you can say that there's, you know, on one side that there may be an ever increasing detachment from material enjoyment, right? That may be there, especially with many yogic practices. But will there also simultaneously be that gradual attachment to Krishna? No, that's what's missing from all the other yoga practices that exists within bhakti yoga. So in those instances, the heart is not really becoming soft, right? It's still very, very hard. And so in this same context, Prabhupada is also explaining that a changed heart means that one simultaneously is becoming more detached from material enjoyment and simultaneously becoming more attached to service of Krishna. And then in this context, Prabhupada speaks about Vidhi Bhakti or Vaidhi Bhakti. And he says that he's stressing this regulated devotional service through the limbs of the body. That's what Vaidhi Bhakti means, using our physical body to practice devotional service. And it's being stressed here since it helps control the mind, whose influence forces the body to act. And so, going back to this initial point of Prabhupada explaining how a change of heart begins with becoming detached to material objects and simultaneously becoming attached to Krishna's service. So Vaidhi Bhakti is the perfect tool for this type of process, because through the different limbs of Vaidhi Bhakti, we basically, we become regimented in a sense, right? We have different rules and regulations to be followed. And what that does is it allows us to help control our senses. But the beautiful thing about Vaidhi Bhakti is that it is all being done in the context of serving Lord Krishna. So it's not simply to regulate the senses, it's also to develop an attachment and a love for Krishna. And that's something that could not be said about any other type of sense control process. And it's interesting because, this idea of controlling the senses, there may be different terms for it in the modern world, but it's not something that's unique to a God conscious person. Many people appreciate this principle of controlling the senses, and you can see that a lot of successful people in the world, those people who are either very famous or very rich, most of them are doing a lot of, at least to get to where they got, they had to go through a lot of, you could say, tapasya, to work hard, right? Working hard. And that's a form of regulation that's required to become successful, even in the material world. But Vaidhi Bhakti is done in the context of becoming not only detached from material objects, but also becoming attached to Krishna. So that's the superior nature of the Vaidhi Bhakti practice. And so another point that Prabhupada makes here is he says that if the reaction does not take place, so this is pertaining to, when one chants the holy name of the Lord and then there's no reaction coming, or we're not feeling any change of heart. So he's saying, if the reaction does not take place, even after continuous hearing and chanting of the holy name of the Lord, it may be considered to be due to offenses only. So this is a question that'll probably come up a lot and continue to come up, but we may wonder that, I've been chanting for so many years, or I've been hearing for so many years, but I'm not experiencing anything. I'm not experiencing the ecstasy that's being described here. And my heart does continue to feel steel framed. And what is the explanation for that? And Prabhupada explains that the only explanation that's left is that it must be due to offenses. So we're aware of the 10 offenses against chanting the holy name. And these are in one sense, you could say this is our priority as devotees, to avoid offenses. Because the thing is that the holy name is pure in itself. So it's not that by our power we somehow infuse feeling into the holy name. The holy name is already consisting of unlimited ecstasy and good experience, but we don't have access to that so long as we continue to commit offenses against the holy name. So basically, the holy name is pure, and our access to its potency is what is being blocked when we commit offenses. And of course, there's so much that could be said on that, but that's just briefly kind of summarizing this point that Prabhupada's making. And it's very important because this is a question that will always come up as one continues to practice more and more. And so really, we should be learning to be very mindful of avoiding these offenses and simultaneously practicing with great determination. Oh.
So many bad thoughts.
I think muted. Okay, thank you. Okay, so now another point here is that some try to imitate the symptoms of ecstasy shown at the stage of bhav, and this is kind of what Prabhupada what he goes into after this point, after explaining how what might be the explanation for the lack of experience. Now he's explaining how there are people who try to also imitate those symptoms of experience. And so he explains how some try to imitate the symptoms of ecstasy shown at the stage of bhav. And it's easy to understand that these symptoms are fake when one sees how such a person is addicted to material enjoyment. And so that's what Prabhupada was explaining in one paragraph of his purport. He was saying how some people may exhibit all of these symptoms of ecstasy. They could even start to cry, rolling on the ground. I don't know if any of you have been to, Krishna Balaram Mandir, I've seen it, but in Vrindavan, but I'm sure there are so many places you can see, actions like this, where I've seen one time one person, one lady, she started crying and rolling and screaming on the ground while the kirtan was going on in the Krishna Balaram temple. And then one of the security guards came over and asked her to get up, and that she had to stop what she was doing. And she immediately gets up and and all of a sudden she's very controlled and like nothing was ever happening, and she walked out. And so if your quote unquote ecstasy is able to be stopped by one security guard walking over and telling you to get up, then you can probably assume that that's not a real ecstasy, because that wouldn't be a strong enough impetus to block the flow of bhav that you're experiencing, quote unquote. But so it's in this same, to this point, Prabhupada is explaining how there are many people that imitate these symptoms, but one easy way to tell who is genuinely experiencing symptoms like this and who is not is to see, are they attached to material things? Are they attached to, as Prabhupada says, people addicted to smoking, drinking, illicit sex with women? These are all very obvious signs that one is not actually experiencing bhav. And there's so many examples in the history of the world of fake gurus and fake spiritual leaders who propagate, some type of they propagate some message explaining detachment from the worldly matter and attachment to a higher power, whatever their different philosophies may be. And then sooner or later, it's found out that the very leaders that were propagating this are addicted to drugs, sex, money, terrible things. So very easy tell that, this is not an actually transcendental experience. So to this end, Prabhupada also, he cites Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. And so actually, where is it? Yeah, so in this section, Prabhupada cites these different symptoms of steady bhav, and this is actually, he doesn't give the source here in the purport, but it's spoken by Lord Chaitanya, but it's found in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, and I thought that we could just read those translations briefly, just so that everyone kind of has that context of, what do these different symptoms, how are they exemplified? It's a very short section. I'll share that screen. Just a second. So here. Yeah. So this is Rupa Goswami writing in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. So I'll just read the translations. So the anubhavs or characteristics of a person who has developed the bud of bhav are as follows: tolerance, not wasting time, detachment from enjoyment, pridelessness, confidence in the Lord's mercy, longing for the Lord, taste for chanting the name of the Lord, attachment to discussing about the Lord's qualities, and attachment to living in the abode of the Lord. So now he'll briefly explain an example of each of these qualities. So he says, tolerance is defined as follows. Tolerance means being undisturbed even when there is cause for disturbance. In the first canto, tolerance of the Bhav Bhakta is illustrated as follows. O Brahmanas, just accept me as a completely surrendered soul, and let Mother Ganges, the representative of the Lord, also accept me in that way. For I have already taken the lotus feet of the Lord into my heart. Let the snake bird or whatever magical thing the Brahmana created bite me at once. I only desire that you all continue singing the deeds of Lord Vishnu. Not wasting time is illustrated in the Hari Bhakti Sudodaya. The devotees continually praise the Lord with words, remembering him with their minds, and offer respects with their bodies. Still, they are not satisfied. With tears flowing from their eyes, they offer their complete lives to the Lord. Next, detachment is defined as follows. Detachment means having a natural distaste for the objects of the senses. Detachment is illustrated in the 5th canto. While in the prime of life, the great Maharaj Bharat gave up everything because he was fond of serving the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Uttama Shloka. He gave up his beautiful wife, nice children, great friends, and an enormous empire. Although these things were very difficult to give up, Maharaj Bharat was so exalted that he gave them up just as one gives up stool after evacuating. Such was the greatness of his majesty. Pridelessness is defined as follows. Pridelessness means, in spite of having a high position, remaining humble. Pridelessness is illustrated in the Padma Purana. King Bhagiratha, though the crest jewel among kings, went out begging at the house of his enemies and offered respects to the dog eaters because he had rati for the Lord. Confidence is defined as follows. Confidence means firm assumption that one will attain the Lord. Translation. As an example of confidence is the following statement of Sanatana Goswami. I do not have prema or the practices of hearing or chanting in bhakti. I have no practice of meditation of Vishnu in the Ashtanga Yoga process, nor do I have practices of jnana or varnashram duties. I do not even have good birth to execute these actions properly. But since you are most merciful to the least qualified, O dear lover of the gopis, though I have impure desires, my aspiration for you continues to agitate me. Almost completed with his explanation. Longing is now defined. Longing means having intense greed for attaining service to the Lord. An example of longing for the Lord is given in Krishna Karnamrita. I long to see that young Krishna who enchants the universe with his bent black eyebrows, with his thick eyelashes, with his attractive, shifty eyes, with his soft words, which melt the heart, with his sweet red lips, and with the intoxicating sound emanating from the clear note of his flute. Taste for chanting the name of the Lord is illustrated. O Govinda, today the young girl with a sweet voice, whose lotus eyes are streaming with tears of honey, is singing your names. Attachment to discussing about the Lord's qualities is described in the Krishna Karnamrita. The youthful Krishna, with the qualities of Cupid, who is extremely sweet and extremely fickle, has stolen my heart. What should I do? And then last verse. An example of attachment for the abode of the Lord is found in the Padyavali. Nanda's house was here. This is where Krishna broke the cart. Here is where Damodar, who cuts material bondage, was bound by ropes. When will I be fortunate enough to wander about in Mathura with tears in my eyes, drinking such streams of nectar flowing from the mouth of an elder of Mathura? So this is Rupa Goswami explaining these symptoms of bhav. And I just wanted to read his initial text, his original text here, just so that people have a context of where Prabhupada is getting this from. So one last point, I won't read Vishwanath Chakravarti's commentary. I know we are beyond time, I think. So one nice point that Prabhupada makes here at the end, he says, the neophytes, due to their being in the lower stage of devotional service, are invariably envious. And then he says this important point. He says, so much so that they invent their own ways and means of devotional regulations without following the acharyas. As such, even if they make a show of constantly chanting the holy name of the Lord, they cannot relish the transcendental taste of the holy name. So this point stood out to me because I think it's very easy, especially as time goes on, we tend to maybe look at the Shastra or the words of the Acharyas, and we may have a thought, something like, okay, well, that was something that they were able to do back then, a certain standard of devotion or a certain standard of practice. That's something that they could do back then because of XYZ reason. And today, that's not possible because of XYZ reason. We can come up with so many reasons. And I would say that it's not, we shouldn't necessarily beat ourselves over the head because we're not able to meet a certain standard of devotional practice right at this time in our lives. But we also should not downplay the standards that have been put in place, right? There's a reason why the scriptures have certain standards for devotional service. And there's a reason why the acharyas have created a system of practice that can sometimes feel a little bit rigorous. And the reason is because this system allows us, like we were highlighting before, to become more and more detached from material enjoyment and more attached to Krishna's service. So I thought that was a very nice, very important point to highlight. And this is kind of the formula to make our heart not steel frames, to make our heart very soft and very open to the ecstasy that comes with chanting the name of Krishna. So this is the final point that I wanted to highlight, but I'm sure so much more could have been said from this purport. But yeah, these are some points I wanted to highlight from Prabhupada's purport today. So does anybody have any final comments or questions they wanted to share?
Yeah, thank you so much, Prabhu. It's nice. I know long purport and very lot of details in the purport to cover. So thank you so much. Yeah, you did very nicely covered. Just by looking at the translation, Prabhu, it looks like little difficult. For get that, but the way Prabhupada explained and you explained, it's very nice. It's like a gradual process. The change of heart doesn't happen at one go. At the end, also the conclusion you mentioned. So it is a standard that is set by the acharyas. We should not downplay it, but from our standard, we don't need to jump to that stage. Because I know we are chanting for a long time. My heart is not. I'm not yet getting. Experiencing this ecstasy.
Yeah.
but still it's a gradual process. I mean, as much as possible, if we are engaging, I mean, of course, the offense is the one that I think you touched upon very nicely, that we should try to avoid them, right? Especially the holy name. So,
Mhm.
yeah, thank you so much, Prabhu, for a nice class.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Many devotees, I think, yeah, maybe, yeah. Anybody else has any other comments?
Hare Krishna, Mukunda, very nice class. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mataji.
I just wanted to, this was just going in my mind when you mentioned about, the example of some Mataji in Vrindavan. And, I think you concluded that that might not be the original mood of her because the security guard would stop her. But at the same time, I'm also thinking we don't know what stage of devotion she is. Yes, if someone is in full trance, it's a different stage. Someone who is like at a different level will have different symptoms. So I don't personally, I don't think we should conclude that that might not be the original. Maybe it's her mood that, okay, it went away in a few, she came back to the material reality or whatever. That's something was going in my mind, so I thought I'd share.
Yeah, no, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I think that's a very, that's extremely important point, especially if we're talking about avoiding offenses.
Yeah.
I think when you're in a place like Vrindavan, there are so many different devotees from so many different, it's not like, for example, it's not like everyone is from ISKCON. There are so many different types of devotees in Vrindavan. And it's really easy as a person coming into Vrindavan, maybe even for the first time, and looking around, seeing different types of devotees, seeing their types of practice, and maybe to judge for being like, oh, they're not doing this certain, they're not behaving in this way, so then they must not be actually experiencing anything. And that's like the number one,
Yeah.
downfall for us.
And that's what we tend to do. And I think we need to, that's what I'm training myself to. And that's why I thought I should share too, because we unknowingly commit those offenses. And I think that's where we have to train ourselves. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. I mean, when it really, at the end of the day, it's not really our business to decide whether someone else is experiencing something or not anyway, because the whole point is, are we experiencing something? No. So let me continue to work on myself, and I won't worry about this other person.
Very true. Yeah. That's what, those are things that at least I'm trying to work on.
Yeah, no, thank you. I appreciate that point so much.
Okay, Prabhu, I think if no.
Okay.
Thank you so
much.